I was a special advisor to the Prime Minister, and one of the areas that I was working on was life sciences and how do you boost the UK's life science capability.
Right now, one of the biggest barriers to medical breakthroughs isn't the science, it's the outdated system that we use to test it. Every drug, device, or treatment has to go through clinical trials, but today, those trials are often painfully slow and wildly expensive. Today's guest on Founders and Builders, Michael Young, saw that firsthand while he was advising the UK Prime Minister on life sciences. Then he left government to co-found Lindus Health, that's gone on to raise $55 million to redesign clinical trials from the ground up. In a world full of red tape, when do you follow the rules and when do you write your own? I'm Joe, this is Founders and Builders, now let's get into it. I think when most of us think about bringing new medicines to market or drug development, we imagine scientists in lab coats and molecules and test tubes and Bunsen burners, but what is the kind of critical layer underneath the kind of drug development process that we might not know about?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. It's something I've been through in my own journey doing life sciences. I was originally working in sort of in the space on market access, working with biotech pharma companies as they thought about how to commercialize. I was then working in government doing work on how do you improve drug discovery and scientific development. But there's a bit in the middle where you actually have to figure out whether or not these drugs work, whether they're safe and effective. And to do that, you run clinical trials. And I think historically that part has been really neglected because there is just an assumption that it is done reasonably well, that there are companies that know how to do it. You give it to one of them and you see what happens. And I think actually for me, it's COVID just showed that there were better ways of running trials and that the ways that have been endemic during the industry for the last 20 years were not optimal. These were trials that we were spending billions of dollars on, and basic technology just wasn't working. And so for me, that was like a light bulb moment that, as you put it, this fundamental part of how we get those new drugs to patients was broken.
So you were in the UK government at the time. Were you advising the Prime Minister at one point on life sciences?
Yeah, I was a special advisor to the Prime Minister, and you end up doing a lot of different things. But one of the areas that I was working on was life sciences and how do you boost the UK's life science capability.
Mm-hmm. And each of these trials was, multi-million-dollar bets that could take years. I mean, what was the core of the problem that you spotted when you were in government?
Well, so hopefully they didn't take years in this instance because we needed these vaccines quickly. And so part of my role was removing all those regulatory hurdles. The problem I saw was actually just that I was being told how well these trials were going. There were no problems as far as anyone in government was concerned. But a friend of mine from university was taking part as a participant on one of the trials, Mary, who I ended up founding Lindus, where I'm at now. And he just showed me how poor the actual experience on the ground was. The app that they were using to collect data stopped working, so people were having to go into hospital to fill in paper forms in these unventilated rooms at the height of the pandemic. And the app still said cold rather than flu rather than COVID, because they couldn't update it, and even despite the fact they had months to do that at the start. And all of those were just sort of red flags that made me think, okay, something isn't working here. And after that, just went really deep into this trial problem that I had never really been exposed to before, and just uncovered this, I think at the heart of it, just an incentive problem that when a company has to run one of these trials, they typically outsource all of that to what's called a contract research organization, sort of a very unsexy name, sort of just called a CRO in the industry jargon. And those CROs bill by the hour to run that trial. And so they're just fundamentally not incentivized to innovate, to use technology. And so the cost of running trials has increased exponentially over the last 20 years. That in turn has increased the cost of developing new treatments. And I think if you look at why are there not groundbreaking new treatments in so many different disease areas, despite the fact that our understanding of human biology and science is improving exponentially. It's trials at the heart of that and a CRO incentive problem.
And so break down what the CRO does in the process. I'm a biotech company, I'm developing a drug. What happens next?
So the CRO it's not, they're not really doing the science. So the biotech company will generally be saying, this is the kind of trial that we want to run. CRO is responsible for operationalizing that. So that means writing all of the plans for how we're going to deliver this trial, the statistical analysis, the operational bits, and then taking that through a regulatory approval and an ethics approval process. So, that you need in order to actually start collecting data from human patients. They're then responsible for finding hospital sites or finding patients, and administering that trial, um, at a sort of a project management layer. So the hospital sort of generally be running it. The CRO sort of sits above all of that and ensures that it's being done properly, safely, and is responsible for collecting the data to ultimately, at the end, analyze, was that drug safe and was it effective? The biotech will then get that data and, depending on that result, hopefully get an approval so that they can start selling that.
And you mentioned that they're kind of paid per hour. What incentives does a CRO have to deliver the best quality service as quickly as possible?
I mean, reputation is probably the incentive to actually like make if you were routinely over, well, they are routinely over budget and over timeline, but if it was too egregious, their reputation would suffer. From an economic perspective, I mean, they are paid more if a trial takes longer. And I have seen things. I used to think that this was an incentive, purely an incentive problem, sort of an abstract way. But I have actually seen concrete examples of where project managers are being paid bonuses for when trials overrun and they get to put through contract changes that expand the trial cost. Like, it's just, and we all pay for that, not just because the drugs are slower or slightly more expensive, but that means that companies aren't being set up in the first place because the economics aren't as good.
Got it. So you and your friend Mary at the
Yeah.
time, how did you then get your heads together and think, you know what, let's start a company around this? What did those early days look like?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's one of the most fun parts of being a founder, is those early days, just like really just going through that ideation cycle of how are we going to fix this. We weren't experts in the space, and I think a lot of the decisions we made come not so much even from instinct or from, you know, expertise that we'd gathered from other people, but sort of a level of naivety, and I think that's helpful, to some extent. So yeah, we just spoke to as many people as possible, and for everyone we spoke to, we asked, "Can you introduce us to two other people within this space?" That snowballed, and we probably spent about 4 months speaking to hundreds of people to try and understand the problem space before we started trying to solve it.
Yeah. And kind of looking outside in at Lindus today, you've made what looks like a really conscious choice to not become a CRO yourself, but to build an offering that replaces the need to have a CRO. Could you kind of unpack what that actually looks like?
Yeah, and that's hard. I mean, but we always talk like, what is the biggest risk we have? And I think that the biggest risk ultimately is that we become a CRO. And if we do that, fine, we could make a reasonably successful business as a CRO, but we're not going to have achieved our mission. We're not going to have built a business of the scale that we want to, and we're not going to have actually made that difference to the way in which companies think about setting up biotechs in the first place. That is tough to try and create that completely new segment. And we experimented with like not calling ourselves a CRO at all when we in the very early days. But then people would, just not understand what we were doing. And they think we were just selling the trial technology rather than actually doing the whole end-to-end thing with that vertical integration. And so we settled upon calling ourselves an anti-CRO. So just try, I'm not sure that necessarily means anything in itself, but it gets across that message that the CRO bit's there, but we are trying to be like the complete antithesis of the way that a CRO operates.
Yes. Okay. So versus working with a CRO, what do these biotech companies working with Lindus benefit from?
We're an end-to-end partner for everything that they are doing. So I think that one of the core pieces is the integration of technology. If you get a CRO, you're working with a CRO, they are a service layer, and they're then piecing together other technology solutions. And the technology solutions are kind of just replacing how this would have been done on pen and paper. But because we have that completely integrated, we are actually able to change the way that we operate, to change processes, to automate manual workflows, which ultimately improves data quality and brings down cost. Um, in 100 different ways. And I can talk about a couple but I think for people not involved in trials, it starts getting pretty jargon heavy quite quickly. I think the second thing is incentive alignment. So we don't bill by the hour in anything that we're doing. We provide a fixed price, a fixed cost for the outcomes that we're delivering. And so the combination of those two things is that we are selling the trial as a product. We're not a service layer selling people, selling bodies. Like, the trial is the product. And we talk about that a lot with all of our teams. And I think for our people working, in our technology and product teams, that's a really interesting way of thinking about it. This isn't SaaS. This is how, as a whole organization, are we making that trial as effective as possible. And so that's how I want a biotech company to think about us, is that we're an end-to-end partner. And the end state for this is that a biotech doesn't have to build up all of the clinical operations and trial expertise, because they can come to us as a one-stop shop.
Yeah. And you mentioned, biotech is not like SaaS.
Yeah.
It's not a pure play software company. When we last spoke, you said that your mission is to make starting a biotech company feel like starting a SaaS company. What did you mean by that?
It's about, I think, sort of the distinction between a waterfall biotech and like an agile creation in any other sector. Now, what I mean by that is that if you discover a new compound, you might, or a new target that you want to hit, there are actually like sometimes multiple different disease areas that you might be wanting to go after. I mean, I'm not sure this is a real example, but you might have hypotheses that this could affect cardiovascular disease and erectile dysfunction. Actually, I think that is the real example of Viagra. You then have to raise money and say, okay, this is the disease area we're going to go after. The one that you choose to target, to some extent, is based on hunch, market sizing, some pretty poor animal models, but you bet your entire biotech that we're going to go after cardiovascular disease. You then say, okay, which part of that? Okay, we're going to target over 70s. And you run your trial, and if that works, great, you've got a drug in cardiovascular for over 70s. If it doesn't, most biotechs will then go bust. Now, at each of those times, you're forcing these companies to artificially bet their entire farm on that one thing. And the reason is because of the cost of running trials and the fact that you don't get the data till right at the end. Now, if we can run the trials and get that data in real time, you can actually run it in both disease areas, in under 70s and over 70s, and shut down the arms that aren't working. And so you massively increase the chances of success, of getting data to understand how it reacts in the body, and ultimately then change the number of companies that are formed in the first place. And how does that make it more like SaaS? It's actually that agile approach so that companies can experiment quickly and fail fast.
Super quick one from me. As you know, every week we ask our listeners what is one tool or one product that they couldn't live without. And this week, it's Attio. Especially if you're in sales or if you're running a startup, Attio is a game changer. It's basically a modern CRM, but it feels like it was built in the last 5 years. Think the style of design of Notion meets the power of Salesforce, and teams can use it to track their deals, manage pipeline, and collaborate as a team all in one place. So if you'd like to find out more about Attio, check out the link in the description down below. And now let's get back into the episode. I think it was 3 episodes ago, for the Founders and Builders podcast, we had the CEO of Charm Therapeutics, Laksh, who joined, and his business was around, AI-enabled drug discovery. What's your thinking as we move into a world where you can build more of these molecules to target kind of novel proteins in silico, and run the simulations through using computers and GPUs and such? Do you see that the kind of ability to run a drug through clinical trials will be the rate limiting step, and that top of funnel will only become wider?
The AI for drug discovery and all of particularly the advances that we've made within understanding of protein are incredible. And if you think sort of at the highest level, like what that means versus 20 years ago, it changes where the pressure point is in the drug development cycle. 20 years ago, someone might spend their entire career working on generating a compound or a target and then spin that out into a biotech. Now we have millions, billions of things that we could potentially test. And so the bottleneck has become the clinical trial piece. Now, so one of my controversial takes would probably be that I'm sort of somewhat skeptical of these AI for drug discovery and the idea that you can do this stuff in silico. we just still don't have a remotely decent understanding of human biology, and drugs will just do very unexpected things when you put them in people. And so I don't believe that the randomized control trial within humans as a sort of as a gold standard is going to disappear. And I think drugs are going to, that understanding is going to take a long time to improve. But yes, that means that the clinical trial piece is only going to get more important because there are going to be more companies that are wanting to test their hypothesis as to whether or not their target, their drug works. And so yeah, like we kind of, as we pitched the company at the very beginning, and part of our investor story is definitely that we want to be like the picks and shovels layer for that AI biotech revolution.
And in the early days of Lindus, and maybe even now, how did you align on which kind of therapeutic areas, which kind of trials you wanted to run? Because I would imagine, there's lots of companies chasing really complex existential, challenges like oncology, for example, but you chose actually maybe the 20% that were easier to prove out in the early days. Could you kind of walk us through that?
So I'm not sure whether this was a deliberate thing or how we actually reached the decision to like start with very simple trials. But right from the beginning, we said that we were going to start with simple trials, increase the complexity as we improved our credibility and our capability. Now, that kind of sounds obvious, but the converse could also work, where you say, actually, we're going to start with the biggest market area and we're going to layer in technology as we go. Our sort of view on that was that if you try that latter approach, you will just build all of the processes and the muscle memory that makes you a CRO. Whereas by starting with the simple trials, we can get the technology to a point where it's basically like, 80% automating the manual work that goes on in that trial type. We then take on the next level of complexity and we do it that way.
Yeah.
And looking back on that decision, we 100% made the right choice. It has enabled us to get really good at doing those simpler clinical trials and to move on much quicker than I'd have expected because we just learned so many lessons much more quickly. And we didn't build in the headcount and the process costs that becomes very hard to then change. Alternatively, we can look at, there were a couple of other companies that were doing similar-ish things back in like 2021. They no longer exist because they went straight into like hardcore oncology trials and they didn't do them very well.
And it's not just the kind of trials, it's also the kind of customers you're trying to sell into.
Yeah.
Chose specifically not to go, let's say, NHS.
Yeah, the customer type point, really, really matters as well. Like selling to big pharma versus selling to a digital health company are completely different customer profiles. Selling to big pharma, you have to go through these multi-year vendor approvals and check all of your technology, your standard operating procedures. And digital health are thinking much more creatively. They don't have 2-year runways, and so they need data quickly. That's not to say they're compromising on safety, but also the treatments are at a different complexity level. So a lot of our early trials were in the digital health space, and we were again somewhat lucky that there was sort of a big boom in digital health, sort of 21, 22.
Yeah,
like that sort of sadly has really gone backwards, and digital health isn't a sexy area for VCs right now. But that really helped us, and I think we were able to run some really incredible trials, and a lot of those companies are still around.
Why do you think digital health isn't so sexy right now? Like, what's happening there?
The short, boring answer is that the companies that were the most developed, Pear Therapeutics in particular, that then sort of had IPO'd, failed, just weren't able to hit the revenue objectives that they wanted. And so if VCs are looking for their comparators as they do their analysis, it wasn't there. And so the reimbursement for digital therapeutics just didn't really ever match the level of investment that was going in at the top. Like that being said, there are now some companies that are sort of within the digital health space, like Hinge Health. They're doing very well, but they're not sort of going down the digital therapeutic, it's like a digital program as a therapeutic. And now I think if companies are approaching this, they're thinking more as like companions to drugs. And I think that's a really interesting area. In so many drug programs, what you'll see is adherence and how long someone actually stays on the therapeutic matter a lot, and digital programs can really assist with that sort of problem.
I'd love to wind back to the point that you made before about making early bets that paid off in the long term in Lindus. And of course, we don't have a time machine, we don't have foresight, but if I were to ask you, what are the 10% of decisions that you made that drove, let's say, 90% of the value?
Yeah.
What comes to mind?
So we touched on a couple of them, which are that you have to be end to end. You can't just build technology and try and then sell that into CROs or sponsors. So that end to end piece was absolutely crucial. And look, probably the biggest driver of that was a level of naivety, as well as, rather than any complex market analysis. Second point, I think, would be that starting with simple clinical trials and sort of building up the complexity over time. Third, as our North Star for the product, I have always had this view that it has to be this real-time, adaptive clinical trial methodology. That's sort of pretty controversial, and there are lots of people who would take that in other directions and go after real-world evidence or synthetic trial data. But so we always center that on the RCT and being able to generate the randomized control trial and the ability to generate evidence in randomized control trials as quickly as possible. I think, and maybe fourth, and is actually like where we set up the company. I think there's sort of some interesting decisions we made there. I'm not sure we understood the impact at the time, but we're headquartered in the UK, but the majority of our trial operations are actually in the United States. But our technology product teams are based here, and I think that has actually worked really well.
Yeah, I guess in popular media, most of the companies we hear start in North America and then expand to Europe. Could you kind of unpack why starting in the UK was an advantage for you?
I think there's two big things, and the first about trial, the second about the technology and product teams, but both about people actually. The first on the clinical trial people that we've been, so clinical operations is the sort of what the function is called in the industry. The UK is pretty unique in that we have these academic clinical trials units, so they're affiliated with the universities and the hospitals, but they're sort of run at sort of arm's length, where they do commercial grade trials. So they'll be doing trials for Pfizer, GSK, whoever. But they're sort of kind of academic in bent. And that means that also like they are relatively resource constrained. And so you get clinical trial specialists who have really broad experience, but of delivering the trials at a commercial grade. Whereas you contrast that with other markets and people have much more of like project management or a siloed experience. And so our ability to embed that way of running trials, that lean, broad lateral approach has been absolutely critical. The second thing is the hiring product and technology people. The UK has a really deep talent pool for product expertise, and the ability to hire people from around the world. The immigration system gets a lot of flack, but we have been able to hire people from Turkey, Israel, Ukraine, wherever we might find a brilliant software engineer, bring them to the UK and to leverage that global talent pool. There's also undeniably, it also just means that the headcount, the number of people you can hire is greater on a seed or a Series A funding, because software engineer salaries would be lower than they would be on the West Coast or the East Coast.
I didn't realize, we were talking about this just before we hit record, just the magnitude of salary difference that you would be paying a software engineer, never mind machine learning engineer or...
and I don't want to give any of our existing team the idea that they're massively underpaid, but no, I think there's obviously just tech bubbles, particularly in the US, and that's probably a controversial statement in itself, but certainly on the West Coast, salary expectations are enormous because there are so many companies competing for a finite talent pool. And you'll have people coming out of Stanford expecting salaries, of approaching like $500,000 a year. And we pay well for the UK, but like we're not paying near that.
Yeah. If we could ask the inverse of the question, what 10% of decisions did you make that actually drove 90% of the pain as you built Lindus? What comes to mind?
So the one that immediately springs to mind is the converse of my first point, which is the doing the end to end. Like I sometimes just think, I wish I'd just built a SaaS business where I could just worry about the technology rather than the complex operational components of running a trial on the ground. Doing that services plus technology piece means the spectrum of problems that we have is just so much broader than it is if you're a narrow technology company. Second thing, trying to hire the balance between experience and like personality fit. Now, there are just a lot of areas in the area that we're operating in, because it's a very heavily regulated industry, where you need someone who knows what the regulations are and like how we're going to comply with them in different ways depending on the area. And at the same time, some of those really experienced people just do not fit with a like startup culture. We are still trying to experiment very quickly, and there is a level of like, organized chaos that you just have to expect of a company of our size. And people who are coming out of pharma with 40,000 people, it's a completely different way of operating. And so I think trying to get that balance right, is not something that we're like, have always got right or are still always getting right. And it means you're taking bets on people and whether or not they can adapt or whether or not they can learn very quickly. And you're always asking one of those things depending on which background they're coming from.
Brilliant. I think, these days we hear a lot about the impact of vibe coding and how that's changing, how much money a company needs to raise before it brings the product to market. And maybe it's already generating, significant revenue by the time it actually starts raising money. But you're not in a space of pure play SaaS, as you mentioned, which is where a lot of the pain originates from. How did you approach finding the right investors that were aligned with this long-term mission that you have to be the anti-CRO?
Yeah, and I think we did put a lot of thought into that investor set and ensuring that we're not bringing in investors that were going to like whatever they said in the meeting, but like turn around 12 months later and be like, oh, actually, could we just explore a SaaS model? Like we don't think that is the solution here. We think you need to do that end to end. How do we actually like think about doing that? Like you can tell a lot by what they write and by the questions they ask you during the fundraising process. And if they, there are, I guess, red flag questions, it's, oh, have you thought about the SaaS piece? Or like start asking about SaaS-metric questions in a way that sort of just really doesn't apply to the revenue model that we have. Or if they're asking about, actually, can you start selling into pharma now, and sort of don't understand that the enterprise sales thing does not immediately translate from SaaS into CRO world. And we just sort of just walk away from those ones. And we've been very lucky that the investors we've got really get that mission. Now, and I think that we have also had an advantage that there are a lot of investors, sort of technology investors, that can see all of the things that are happening in life sciences and these advances that are being made, and they don't want to make bets on individual biotechs or AI for drug discovery companies. And to some extent, we're a leverage bet on that industry because we serve such a broad range of customers. And so our fundraising journey has been like really successful, and I think there are definitely investors that want to get involved and get it, but there are ones that we've very quickly realized didn't get the bigger picture.
Yeah, it has, at least from where I'm sitting, it has been really successful. You brought on some super VCs, like I think Seed Camp, First Minute came in early, Balderton, Creandum. What if you were to, sit down with other founders, and I'm sure you get this question a lot, what can they learn from the way that you've approached fundraising that's allowed you to build that momentum and that buy-in?
Be very transparent about what you're looking for in an investor. I mean, that I think has meant that we've ended up getting investors who are completely aligned and trust us rather than someone who is coming in just because your revenue metric looks good. I think that's really important. Now, a lot of companies are in the position where they're thinking, how are we actually going to approach fundraising? Like one mistake that I see early stage founders do is they will approach it in far too like gradual a way, and they'll say, okay, I'm going to speak to one, that's sort of my preferred, then I'll speak to another, and they sort of spread it out over 6 months. And like certainly it's sort of that's pre-seed, seed, probably Series A. I think a much more intense and deliberate fundraising strategy like pays off. You don't want to be in the position where everyone knows that a couple of funds have turned you down and you're sort of still on that fundraising thing. I think you want to do it quickly, intensely. And I think that benefits the company as well, because you spend as little time distracted by fundraising as possible.
How practically can you do that? Is it really just about timing the conversations, or are there also other ways that you've kind of learned?
Get everything ready, like get your deck, your data room ready. Like don't start conversations and be trying to pull your data room together in the background. That means being firm with some VCs, because they will try and get in and say, "Oh, look, it's just a conversation. Let's chat." But like, their interest is whether or not they can preempt and get in there before someone else. So be disciplined. And then and then just stack it. Like I remember with our seed round, we were doing like 20 calls a day for 2 weeks. Probably tailed off towards the end. And Mary and I were mixing that up between the two of us. But yeah, we deliberately said we're going to pack it in as quickly as possible and got introductions. Probably one other thing to say is like try and get introductions to the fund. I think going in cold pitches definitely makes it harder to get in front of the right person.
So that's the land the investment, but how have you and Mary and the team in Lindus thought about keeping investors in the loop, showing that momentum, and building one business? Because what I regularly hear from guests of the Founders and Builders podcast is that they sometimes feel like they could be tempted to build two businesses, one for their customers, one for their investors.
Yeah. Interesting. We have regular catch-ups with each of our sort of big investors one-on-one, as well as having sort of the periodic board meetings. And I think in that we are, if anything, like too transparent about like what are the biggest problems that we are currently thinking about. And so I think that means that they are very exposed to how we're thinking, what the challenges that we have are. And that means that we're not pitching one thing to them, pitching another to customers, pitching something internally. I think that treating them as a thought partner and a sounding board is important. And I have seen a few founders where they are in pitch mode every time they speak to their board. And I think that's unhelpful, because then the board or their investor set just don't really understand what is going on in the company.
How many people are in Lindus right now? How many in the team?
About 150.
Okay. And you started the company when?
March 21.
Okay, great. So let's say in about 4 years, you've grown from you and Mary to 150 people. You've mentioned before that growth can hide a multitude of sins.
Yeah.
What are you hiding?
What are you hiding? I mean, what I meant by that, for anyone listening, is I think that when you go into a fundraising process and you have a very sexy revenue line and gross margin looks good, the level of due diligence is probably not as high as it is in a deep tech investment without those like solid financial metrics. So what I don't think that we're not hiding anything, but I think underneath those really good metrics are lots of complexity. Like we have product complexity, we have operational complexity, we've got the sort of standard startup team scaling complexity, and that's what I spend a lot of my time thinking about. A company can be doing very well, but that doesn't mean that there aren't challenges that are going on, and what are the implications of that for investors. But you hear it, like, you look on LinkedIn and you'll see, oh yeah, we decided to invest after 20 minutes because we saw their ARR.
Sure.
And it's like, I mean, fine, maybe it works for them, but there will definitely be sins underneath that.
Yeah. What's your bet if you were to sit on the other side of the table and you were, let's say, a VC in some investment committee? What would the key questions under the kind of revenue and profitability curve, what would you be asking?
Yeah, I'd want to understand what the founders are what problems are they spending their time thinking about? And I'd want to be aligned that I thought that those were the problems that they should be thinking about at that stage of the business. Or at least that they have other people that they can lean on. I mean, if you're talking to a seed stage startup and both of the founders are thinking like about their exit strategy or about approaching everything from a like legalistic point of view, those are obviously going to be things which are not aligned with where the company needs to be. So I really try and understand, like, beneath the pitch, what are the problems the founders have right now and how are they thinking about solving them?
If Michael Lindus is wildly successful, let's fast forward 10 years, What does the world look like?
Healthy, happy, very long living. It is an exponential growth in the number of biotechs that are coming to market because it is so much easier to set up, experiment, and fail fast. That means more capital in biotech at the top of the market. That means that more trials are being run. They're shorter, they're faster, more of them are being shut down. And the end result of that is that there are far more treatments, that doesn't have to be drugs, medical devices, diagnostics, digital therapeutics,
Cosmetics.
cosmetics, yeah, that are coming onto the market and actually solving patient needs. One of the things that in particular that I thought a lot about as a clear proof point that this wasn't working is that there have been basically no advances in mental health over the last 20 years. I mean, SSRIs were discovered in about the 60s or something. That's basically still our frontline treatment, despite the fact that they have crazy side effects.
What are SSRIs for people that...
Selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors. So if someone has depression, which I think 12 million people in the UK are diagnosed with depression, it's debilitating. You'll generally be prescribed SSRIs, and that is crazy. And the reason for that is because the cost of running trials in mental health and the level of variability you get in sort of mood disorders is so high that no one can afford to develop the therapeutics.
Right.
And so if you can bring down the cost of trials, there are entire disease areas where you could change the paradigm for how people think about it. And the impact that could have is enormous.
And from what I'm hearing you say earlier, it's not just about the cost of running one trial, it's about being able to parallelize running multiple at the same time. So the hit rate of the likelihood that this actually reaches people in the real world.
So like 100 times more trials being run, but still 99% of them being shut down 10% of the way through because you're seeing that they're not effective. And that means that there are also, like, I think it's borderline unethical today that we're not able to see on a trial that people are taking these drugs or taking placebo when they could be taking one that works for years before you actually see that it doesn't work. That strikes me as pretty unethical.
The analogy that you've used before is that it can be tempting to build the faster horse.
Yes.
Unpack that for us.
It's a big thing. I'm probably in any industry, but particularly one which is very heavily regulated, and people, we have a lot of internal users as well that are very strongly opinionated about what is going to make their workflow easier. And when you're then thinking about building the product, if you go and talk to users and they will say, oh, actually, yes, it'd be great if we could automate this, or we like to do source data verification in this specific way. It'd be a bit easier if you could tweak it here. If we did all of those things and we just said, oh yeah, that's what we're going to do, we would end up probably with the best tech platform for running clinical trials, but we aren't going to have changed the paradigm. And so the faster horse piece is Henry Ford, I think, or probably apocryphal. So when I built the car, people were telling me that they wanted a faster horse. We've got to take bigger bets on what we think the technology and the product needs to achieve to actually change the trial paradigm. And so for me, that is real-time adaptive clinical trials. And actually, if you're doing that and you're using AI for data management and for data monitoring, or at least 99% of it, then so many of the things that people are asking for are just like actually completely irrelevant. So that's how we think about it, and getting that balance right between what we need today for our trials and what I think the end state looks like is a tough sort of tightrope to balance.
And who inspires you that is making big bets today?
I think Palantir and Anduril are very incredibly cool companies. I think Wayve is an extremely cool company.
Yeah.
I think with all of those companies, and I'm sure I'll be able to think of sort of some earlier stage ones as well, they have a core hypothesis that at the time was like contrarian, and it's sort of now actually seeing, oh yeah, of course, why wouldn't you do it that way?
Yeah.
For Wayve, that would be that they were going to build an OS that would for autonomous driving that could then go into other cars rather than trying to build that like vertically integrated hardware as well. For Anduril, it would be that they are going after that, again, not just trying to do one individual piece of technology, but building that end-to-end defense manufacturing and competing against primes. And for Palantir, it's to do with the value of data that all of these companies have. And rather than just trying to build a very industry-specific piece, solve one problem, really go after that at sort of broadest level. And all of the successful companies probably have some contrarian take that we now accept because, but there will have been seed investors who said that's never going to work.
Let's take a step out of Lindus.
Yep.
Actually, Michael, what do you spend your time thinking about when you're not in the business?
Most of the time spend my time thinking about the business, but when I do manage to, I think that's probably one of the things actually that you just don't appreciate as a founder is just how much time you then end up like thinking about it, even when you make me on holiday or at dinner, just solving the things or thinking about the biggest problems in the back of your mind. And one of the changes that has meant for me is that actually the time that you can switch off, so it's between like Christmas and New Year, it's like the only time everyone in the world like stops working. So that I've been doing like big trips that point in the year. I love that. Like went to Egypt, India, really like complete different cultures, look at the history. And if I do have spare time, that's probably where I like to go is history and different cultures. I've scrubbed this from my LinkedIn and things because the life sciences industry is pretty credentialist, but I studied history and like predominantly medieval history at university.
Okay, how come?
How come? I mean, because it's like stories, but they're better because they're true. You can go and see a castle and you can see like the history, well, the stories that took place on it actually manifested in the physical environment. So, I mean, there's one particular castle that I love, a Chateau Gaillard in the Loire Valley going into Paris, where it was besieged by it was English and it was besieged by the French at the beginning of the 13th century. And the English Castellan kicked out all of the peasants who had taken shelter. And normally the besiegers would allow them to disperse. But in this instance, in order to try and starve the English, they didn't. And so the peasants then sort of dug out caves within the moat system that you can still see. And then ultimately one of the French climbed up a latrine chute and got inside the castle, and the castle fell. And you can all see all of that. And this history, it was almost 1,000 years old, but it's literally there. So that's why I studied it, and I still love spending time sort of taking myself out of the problems that we have or the modern day with those stories.
That I feel so lucky to be able to take a 2.5 hour flight or 2 hour train to Florence, Rome, Paris. I mean, I think it's one of the things in Europe we often take for granted, that we can just land in these places with such rich historical culture.
Yeah, completely. And I mean, it's something. It's one of the reasons I probably don't want to live in the US anytime soon, is that you haven't got that depth of history or culture, the ability to go to somewhere that feels completely different because of that medieval environment that you have in different cities. And there are so many cities that are overlooked. I mean, Vienna, Madrid, like smaller Italian ones, Siena, Lucca,
Totally.
that are beautiful. And you could spend a weekend there and completely lose yourself in a different time.
Where is your favorite place on planet Earth?
For living, it would have to be London. I think like London is just it's got such a good balance. It's sort of getting harder to say that. And I don't know a founder based in London. Well, yeah, actually, I don't know many friends based in London that aren't at least thinking about what leaving might look like at this point. But for holiday or for just, if I didn't have to live there, I'd have to say Venice. I mean, it's not a
I've had
unique
mixed reviews on Venice.
Look, I mean,
actually,
it's far too touristy. One of the COVID silver linings was I went there during one of those like 2-week breaks where the lockdown rules were relaxed, and it was empty, and it was completely different. You'd be walking through St. Mark's Square and there'd be 2 other people.
Yeah.
And I mean, that was just beautiful. Like actually, what is the difference between that and walking through it 500 years ago? There's so few modern buildings that it was pretty profound.
I mean, walking around central London was pretty.
Yeah, but it's still, you've then got an office block to throw you out of your medieval reverie. The other place I think is massively underrated is North Wales.
I didn't see that coming. It was going to be Maldives or North Wales.
No, North Wales. Like, I choose that over the Maldives 100 times out of 100. What's the why? hiking, beautiful mountains, beautiful scenery, like pretty untouched. But you also, again, sort of see my pet topic here, but the best castles in the world are in North Wales.
Yeah, I'm starting to think you should just move into a castle.
I'm not sure I'd thought about keep costs. Lindus would need to be a lot more successful.
What haven't we talked about, Michael, that you think we should have?
Honestly, I've been looking to trying to fit castles into an interview for a long time, so thank you for humouring me.
What is the biggest sandcastle you've ever built?
Yeah, I think I can answer that. I mean, I'm not sure I can give you dimensions, but I remember it. It was my mum's family all from Lincolnshire, and went there during COVID when sort of couldn't leave the country, and spent a couple of days building this absolutely enormous one on the beach. It was at least 5 meters in diameter.
Wow.
Yeah, and pretty tall. Like, look, sometimes it's fun to be a kid again, and I think, and there's actually something quite rewarding.
Yep.
So yeah, do that. I'm definitely the person who, if they could, would be on their beach in the south of France and ruin everyone else's holiday by getting my spade out. And
That's very British of you, Mike.
I know.
You mentioned it's really important to be a kid again. You spend a lot of time, talking with customers, talking to investors, getting the team organized internally. Like, how do you kick back and like embrace the sense of play?
Not enough. Like, it's honestly something I've been sort of last few months or so, I think I need to do more of, because as I say, it's like so hard to stop thinking about work. What do I do? I mean, I think seeing friends that you don't know purely through a work context, where they're not just going to ask you about work questions, and you just got that shared history, becomes incredibly important. Play computer games, play board games, like, yeah, just something where you're distracted and it's sort of in a flow.
Yeah, I've kind of been out of the world of gaming for like the last 4 or 5 years. The last time I played was Friends.
Yeah.
Call of Duty. What's the last game that you've thought?
I actually was playing a game at the weekend, this game called Suzerain, which is sort of, it's a weird political simulator, so very close to what I was actually doing in my previous job. But I think it is fun and like weirdly accurate representation of like what the whole red box ministerial process is like in government.
A political simulator.
Yeah, I mean, that's sort of, I'm probably unfair.
Sounds like the worst game.
You are the dictator of a strain, sort of this fictional country, and you have to manage it. It's extremely difficult. I think I ended up getting impeached or overthrown, in every game, in every playthrough that I did. But I enjoyed that. I'm not sure what that says about me, but I definitely recommend anyone sort of into politics giving that a shot.
Awesome. Cool. Last question from me, Michael. If we fast forward, let's say 40 years into the future, and you and I are sat next to each other, imagine we can see past the London fog into the stars, and I turn to you and I say, Michael, what was it all for?
I think that human health really is at the foundation of everything, and that is like probably tautological, but I mean, even going back to the ancient Greeks, I mean, healthy mind, healthy body is at the core of it. And the Greeks spent a lot of time thinking about exercise and how you stay healthy, as well, alongside like their philosophy. And there is no point having incredible AI that automates all of our tasks if we're still dying at 80 and spending the last 30 years in pain or unhappy. And so, yeah, I think it comes back to health and people, and that's what we're trying to enable.
Just on that exact point, I was speaking with a friend yesterday, and they said something, they put it really succinctly, and it's kind of stuck with me. They said, most people spend the first 50 years of their life trading their health for their wealth.
Yeah.
And the last 30 trading their wealth for their health.
I think, yeah, that's completely true. And I think this, like, thinking about healthy life expectancy is I think absolutely critical. And actually, a lot of what our health system has been prioritizing over the last 50 years is extending end of life care. And actually, we need to think a lot about actually how do you extend that? You say 50 years, how do we make that 60 years and then 70 years? And that means actually approaching treatment, prevention, and clinical trials in a new way.
Michael, it's been so much fun. Thanks for coming on.
No, thank you, Joe.